What kind of idiot walks past a dying dog and does nothing? The voice cracked through the California heat like a whip. Jonah Maddox threw his truck door open and slammed his boot onto the dirt. The stench of panic and burned air filled his lungs. His knuckles were still smeared with grease from the firebreak he'd been clearing up in Tillery County, but now, none of that mattered. Not when the screaming was this loud. Not when the air was alive with the sound of wings. They weren't flies, they weren't mosquitoes, they were bees, a storm of them, and in the middle of the chaos, tangled up in wire fencing and wild mustard flowers, was a golden retriever convulsing in terror. Jonah couldn't see the dog's eyes at first, just the frantic whipping of a tail, the twisting of a body trying to escape, the impossible sound of whimpers swallowed by a cloud of buzzing fury. The bees swarmed his face, his neck, his hind legs. It was as if the ground had erupted into venom. Jonah had seen plenty of strange things during his 10 years as a volunteer animal responder, but this looked like nature had turned vengeful. The woman who had called 911 stood frozen a few feet away, clutching her child with wide, tear-lined eyes. They said, "Don't go near. The swarm's aggressive. He's going to die out there." "Then he dies," Jonah said coldly, "unless someone does something." And he ran off. The bees struck first at his arms, his ears, lashing him like living thorns. Jonah dropped to his knees as he reached the fence. The dog, barely moving now, let out a sound so broken it didn't even sound canine anymore. His head twitched, but his eyes didn't blink. They were nearly swollen shut. Jonah didn't waste time trying to reason. He ripped his jacket off and threw it over the dog's body. With one hand, he shielded the retriever's face. With the other, he fought to cut through the tangled wire that held the animal's back leg hostage. Barbed, old, abandoned fencing from a forgotten orchard. Lined, the bees surged, landing on Jonah's wrists, stinging again and again, but he didn't stop. Blood mixed with stings. Skin blistered. Still, he pulled. Still, he cut. The leg came free, and he lifted the limp, barely breathing retriever in his arms like he'd carried a child. Jonah turned and ran with the dog pressed to his chest, not toward the ambulance that had finally arrived across the field, but straight toward the creek just yards away, water-cool flowing salvation. He plunged both of them in, letting the water tear the bees off, letting the current soothe what pain it could. When the medics reached him, Jonah's vision had gone patchy. He couldn't feel half his face. The world swam in gray, but he still heard the dogs breathing, ragged, wet, shallow. "But they're not alive. I need his vitals now," one of the EMTs shouted as Jonah collapsed beside the retriever. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the dog's swollen paw brushing lightly against his elbow. It wasn't a twitch, it was a thank-you. The next time Jonah opened his eyes, it was a hospital ceiling staring back. Tubes, wires, beep monitors, anti-venom. He tried to speak but couldn't. Not yet. A nurse with a ponytail and kind eyes leaned over him. "You saved that dog's life," she said softly, "and nearly lost yours doing it. They're saying it was an Africanized swarm. Wild colony from an abandoned beekeeper's barn. The county hasn't seen a cluster that aggressive in years." Jonah didn't care about the bees. He only cared about one thing. "Dog," he whispered, his voice cracked and thin. "He make it." The nurse smiled. "You should see this." She stepped aside, and behind her stood a boy no older than 8. At his feet sat the golden retriever's shaved patches, bandaged legs, a cone on his neck, but eyes shining like he remembered everything. The boy smiled, then gently guided the dog forward. "He won't leave your door," the boy said. "His name's Cooper. I was the one who found him. He's ours. But we couldn't reach him. My mom called everyone. No one came." Jonah's throat burned. He looked down at Cooper, who pressed his chin gently on Jonah's bedrail, eyes locked on his rescuer. That was all the answer he needed. Something deeper had been saved that day, seeming more than a dog, and the world hadn't seen the last of either of them. The hospital walls were still humming with silence when Jonah awoke again, this time without machines beeping beside him, just the steady sound of shallow breathing near his right hand. He turned his head and saw Cooper, the golden retriever, curled up on the linoleum floor beside his bed, cone still crooked but tail gently thumping whenever Jonah blinked. He wasn't dreaming. The dog was still alive and somehow still here. But what stunned Jonah more was the voice that followed. "I didn't think anyone would care enough to do what you did," said a soft voice. It was the boy again, Sam, he now knew. The kid sat cross-legged by the door, arms wrapped around his knees. "The fire department came. The animal controls said they couldn't. Only you ran into the bees." Jonah tried to sit up, his muscles stiff and sore from the venom and exhaustion. "Where's your mom?" he asked, voice hoarse. "She went to talk to the rangers. They want to figure out where the hive came from. She said they found something ... weird, like someone was keeping the bees." Jonah's brows furrowed. "What do you mean keeping?" Sam's voice dropped lower. "There's this man. He used to live in the abandoned orchard house across the creek. People say he used to harvest bees for some kind of backyard honey business, but it got shut down after one of his swarms attacked hikers. My mom says he blamed the town and left, but not before saying something creepy like, 'The bees will outlive your kindness.'" Jonah's blood went cold. He remembered that property. Fencing rusted into the earth, half-collapsed barn. He'd driven past it hundreds of times during fire patrol shifts. Never once thought someone might weaponize nature out of bitterness. Sam stood and walked closer. To Cooper, that dog, he wasn't always ours. He showed up one day in front of our porch with a bloody paw and no tag. My mom said he'd probably been dumped. She didn't want to keep him at first. Said things had been too hard since my dad left, but I begged her. Cooper lifted his head as if understanding every word, his swollen eyes watching Sam with quiet affection. Jonah struggled to piece the story together through the throb in his temples. So, you think someone tied him there on purpose? Sam nodded, eyes brimming with something far beyond his age grief or guilt. Jonah couldn't tell. It didn't make sense. Cooper doesn't run away. He's scared of everything. But that morning, he was just gone. And then, we found him tied up. Right next to that old orchard. Jonah exhaled, piecing it together. Someone knew the swarm would return. Someone had wanted the dog punished or sacrificed. Maybe a grudge. Maybe cruelty for cruelty's sake. I should have come sooner, Jonah muttered, gripping the side rail of the hospital bed. No, Sam whispered. If you had, it would have been you too. That sentence hung in the air like a nail through wood. The next morning, Jonah insisted on being discharged against the nurse's recommendation. His legs wobbled, his arms stung beneath gauze. But he needed to see the orchard himself. Sam's mom, Maria, drove them in her rusted pickup, Cooper resting across the back seat, now fitted with a proper collar. They reached the edge of the property just as dawn cut across the sky. The trees stood like burnt skeletons. Old hives littered the broken barn floor, boxes warped with time, blackened with ash. But the swarm itself, gone, no buzz, no movement. Not Maria shivered. I don't know what that man did here, but it's like he left something behind, something bitter. Jonah approached one of the old hive frames. Under the corner, stuck between rotting wood, was a metal tag. Not for bees, for a dog. The name barely visible. Cooper, he said, turning it over. This was his. Maria's eyes widened. You think he was the beekeeper's dog? Jonah stared down at the retriever, who sat quietly by his side, ears perked, watching every gesture. I think someone tied him here hoping no one would care, Jonah said. But he found someone who did. They didn't speak much on the way back, but something had shifted. A wrong had been dragged into the light, and though it wouldn't bring justice overnight, it meant the healing could finally begin. That night, Jonah sat alone on his porch in the warm California dark, wrapped in a blanket, his body still aching but his heart strangely steady. Cooper lay beside his rocking chair, head resting on Jonah's foot like they'd always belonged to each other. You saved me too, buddy, Jonah said under his breath. More than you know. And when Cooper softly nudged Jonah's leg with his damp nose and let out a quiet sigh, it felt like the final piece of something broken had fallen into place. The rescue hadn't been one-sided. Both man and dog had found something worth surviving for. The orchard lingered in Jonah's thoughts like the burn on his arms, quiet but impossible to ignore. The more he stared at Cooper resting near the porch railing, the more he felt the weight of a story that wasn't finished. The dog's calm eyes said thank you, but they also held something deeper, something unresolved. Dogs didn't get that kind of trauma by accident. 3 days after the hospital release, Jonah returned to the firehouse not on duty, but to borrow an old map. He scanned the faded paper until his finger landed on a shaded patch bordering county land. The old orchard wasn't just a forgotten property. It had once been part of a protected apiary program. And at the bottom corner of the map, in tiny printed type, was a name Jonah hadn't heard in years. Walter Griggs. Jonah stood frozen. Griggs had been a recluse, a local beekeeper who used to host school field trips until a boy got stung badly and nearly died. After that, the permits were pulled, and Griggs disappeared. Rumors spread fast that he blamed the town, that he'd cursed the land. But nobody thought twice when he left. No one connected the dots when Cooper appeared months later, injured and skittish until now. Later that evening, Jonah knocked on Maria's door. She looked surprised to see him but stepped aside. Cooper jumped from the couch and padded toward him like an old friend. I need to ask you something, Jonah said. When Cooper first showed up, was it right after the orchard fire? Maria's brows creased. Yes, just days after. Hup, did you know? Because I think he was part of that fire. I think he came from Griggs's place and I think someone left him there on purpose. Maria leaned against the counter, folding her arms tightly. You think Griggs did this? All this time I thought Cooper was just abandoned. I didn't know it was revenge. It wasn't revenge, Jonah said quietly. It was cruelty disguised as punishment. Griggs couldn't get back at the town, so he used something defenseless. But Cooper didn't die. He ran. Maria's hands trembled as she brought them to her face. Sam always said Cooper flinched when he heard buzzing. I thought he was just scared of bees. No, Jonah whispered. He remembered. The next morning, Jonah and Maria took Sam to the old town hall archives. The clerk, an elderly man named Curtis, helped them sift through boxes of expired permits and complaints. Eventually, they found a dusty file labeled Griggs Apiary Dispute. Inside were pages of neighborhood complaints, signed petitions, and a single handwritten note in blocky cursive that read, "If I lose my bees, someone else loses what they love to." Maria covered her mouth. Jonah stared at the note like it was a ghost come to life. He wasn't talking about people, he said, meant Cooper. They called the sheriff, who reopened the case based on the evidence in Cooper's recovered tag. Forensic experts revisited the orchard and uncovered remnants of a makeshift chain tethered to a burned post far too short for any dog to escape. The fire, the bees, the swarm, they were all orchestrated. Griggs hadn't just kept bees. He'd bred aggression into them, tampered with hives, and created what locals now whispered about, weaponized swarms. But as the investigation spread through town, something unexpected happened. People who had once ignored Maria's quiet family now began stopping by with flowers, food, and long overdue apologies. The story had gone viral after Jonah's niece posted about the rescue, complete with a photo of Cooper gently licking Sam's cheek from his hospital bed. The world, it seemed, needed stories of second chances, of resilience. Yet, amidst the support came unease. Griggs was still missing. No one had seen him in years. And while some believed he died in the fire, others feared he was still out there, watching. One stormy night, Jonah sat by his fireplace, nursing a sore arm and flipping through a journal he had started after the rescue. A knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, Sam stood soaking wet with a trembling Cooper at his side. "Mom's out late," the boy said. "I got scared." Cooper kept pacing like he sensed something. Jonah let them in, dried them off, and lit another fire. But something about the night felt wrong. Cooper wouldn't settle. He paced in circles, ears twitching, tail low, hackles slightly raised, and then it came. A faint buzzing outside. Jonah rushed to the window, flashlight in hand. He scanned the dark edge of the woods. Nothing, but the buzzing grew louder. Not dozens, hundreds. He turned toward Cooper, who had now positioned himself between Sam and the window, body rigid. That's when Jonah saw it, a figure, just beyond the fence line, standing still, watching. He stepped out with the flashlight and shone the beam empty. Empty air, but near the fence was a torn piece of cloth familiar in color. Faded brown canvas like an old beekeeper's jacket. He picked it up, heart racing back. Inside, he locked every door and sat by Sam, who had fallen asleep curled next to Cooper. The dog finally relaxed but didn't take his eyes off the window. Jonah didn't sleep that night, not because of fear but because he finally understood the depth of what Cooper had endured, what he had survived, and what he was still protecting them from. This wasn't just a rescue story anymore, it was a warning. A wounded soul had left the woods not for vengeance but for redemption, and the dog they all thought had been abandoned, that had never stopped guarding the ones he loved. The cloth in Jonah's hand told a story his heart wasn't ready to believe, that someone, possibly Griggs, was still alive, still lurking, and still dangerous. The faded fabric, weather-worn and reeking faintly of old smoke and honey, wasn't just trash caught in the fence, it was a message. One meant for Cooper, one meant for all of them. The next morning Maria arrived with Sam before sunrise. Her face was pale, and her words sharp. "He was here last night, wasn't he?" she asked. Jonah nodded without answering. Cooper hadn't slept. He stayed by the window, alert, as if waiting for a second knock that never came. Maria sat at the kitchen table while Sam curled up on the floor beside Cooper. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I thought the worst part of this was over, but it's not. We're not just talking about a man who trained bees. We're talking about someone who trained them to hurt, someone who tied up a dog to be torn apart and walked away." Jonah rubbed his temples. "We need to find him before he finishes what he started." The police weren't much help. The cloth was too old for DNA. There were no fingerprints, no trail, just a warning dropped like a breadcrumb in the dark. Sheriff Maddox, a good man but overworked and skeptical, offered extra patrols but little more. "The guy's probably long gone," he'd said. "People don't survive burns like that in a wildfire, and if he did, he's not coming back." But Jonah wasn't so sure. Cooper wasn't just pacing for nothing. The dog knew the scent, knew the fear, knew the threat hadn't ended when the fire died out. 3 nights later the humming returned. It was subtle at first, blending in with the whir of Jonah's old ceiling fan. But Cooper noticed instantly. He rose to his feet, a low growl rippling from his throat. Sam sat up from the couch, confused but not afraid until he saw the dog's eyes, wide, fixed, unblinking. Jonah stepped outside, flashlight and bat in hand. The woods was still. No movement, no wind. Just that strange, electric tension hanging in the air like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Then he saw them. Not people, not lights, hives, new ones. Rows of them, tucked between the trees along the back fence. None there just days before. White wooden boxes with painted red markings. Dozens of bees swarmed around them like an army forming ranks. He stumbled back inside, breath caught in his throat. "He's here," he said to Maria, who had just stepped in from the driveway. "Griggs is back. He's rebuilding right here on my land." Maria didn't speak. She just pulled Sam close and held him like she used to when he had fevers as a baby, tight, without words. By morning, Jonah had made a decision. We're going in. He told Maria, you stay here with Sam. I'm not letting this man play God with bees and destroy whatever peace Cooper has left. I'm ending this. He grabbed a jug of gasoline in his old fireman's jacket. Cooper followed him to the edge of the woods, silent but steady. He didn't need to be told. He had waited for this, suffered for it, and now he would finish it. The orchard was dead silent when they arrived, save for the faint buzz that never stopped. Jonah moved slowly, scanning the trees for traps. Griggs had been a beekeeper once, but now he was something else, something twisted. The hives looked normal on the outside, but Jonah could sense something darker inside. Then he saw it. A shack built from rotted wood and nailed tin, almost completely camouflaged by wild branches and overgrowth. The door hung open. Inside, cages lined the walls, empty but stained. Old tools lay on the floor, and in the far corner, a small black box with blinking lights. Cooper sniffed it, ears raised. A remote hive trigger. Motion sensors. Jonah's heart pounded. Is not just breeding them, he's planning to release them. He backed out slowly, and that's when he heard it. A crunch behind him. He turned, and there he was, Griggs, not a ghost, not a rumor. A man burnt, broken, and barely recognizable. His face twisted with scar tissue. His eyes were wild, but sharp. You took him from me, Griggs rasped, pointing at Cooper. He was mine. Until you ruined everything. Jonah kept his voice calm. You left him to die, Griggs sneered, because he was weak. A failed guardian. He let the hives burn. I needed something better, so I let the fire decide. Jonah stepped closer. You're done, Walter. The world knows. The police are coming. Griggs smiled. Then let's give them something to see. He raised a remote. His thumb hovered over the button, but before he could press it, Cooper lunged. Years of pain, fear, and silence exploded in that leap. The German shepherd didn't bark. He didn't growl. He moved like wind and flame fast, silent, sure. He hit Griggs mid-chest, knocking him backward into a pile of rusted gear. The remote clattered to the floor. Jonah rushed forward, kicking it away and yanking Griggs upright. Cooper backed off, watching. Griggs didn't fight. He just stared, stunned, as if the animal he thought he'd destroyed had returned from the ashes to judge him. When police arrived, they found Griggs in cuffs and Cooper sitting at the orchard's edge, chest rising slowly, eyes closed, not in sleep, but in peace. The hives were dismantled, the land was cleared, and Cooper never flinched at buzzing again. The courtroom was cold, quiet. Walter Griggs sat hunched over at the defendant's table, wrists in cuffs, burns crawling down his face like permanent scars of the past. The trial had drawn attention. From across the state, former beekeeper turned madman, accused of animal cruelty, biomanipulation, and endangering public safety. But all eyes weren't on him. They were on the dog lying quietly at the feet of a young boy in the front row. Cooper, no longer trembling, no longer hiding behind walls and shadows. Beside him sat Sam, one hand gently resting on the shepherd's back, and on his other side, Maria, her chin held high. Jonah sat behind them, quiet, steady. He hadn't spoken publicly about what happened in the orchard. He didn't need to. Cooper had done all the talking with his scars. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all charges, Griggs didn't move, didn't blink, but Jonah noticed something. In that stillness, there was no shock, no regret, just emptiness. The kind a man carries when his empire was made of hives, and all of it was burned to the ground by the dog he thought he broke. Weeks passed. Griggs disappeared into a federal holding facility in upstate New York, and Cooper slowly began stepping out into the world again. Jonah rebuilt the back fence and cleared the woods behind it, one branch at a time. He left space for wildflowers. Bees still came, but the natural kind, untouched, unmanipulated nature healing where madness had once taken root. Then, one morning, in early spring, something unusual arrived at Jonah's front porch, a wooden box with no label. He opened it carefully, finding inside a simple leather collar, aged but intact. On the brass nameplate were the words, Cooper, Keeper of Fire. Beneath it, a note, no signature, just 3 words in neat, childlike print. He chose you. Jonah didn't need to ask who sent it. He slipped the collar onto Cooper's neck, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the dog let his tail sway gently side to side. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Later, that month, the mayor of Ashbury Falls called Jonah and Maria to City Hall. There had been a petition once started by Sam's schoolteacher and signed by nearly everyone in town to recognize Cooper for his bravery. Jonah had resisted the idea at first. Cooper didn't need medals. But Sam had said it best. He may not understand a plaque, but he'll feel safe if everyone knows he saved us. The ceremony was small but heartfelt, under the oak tree in the center of town square. The mayor read the proclamation aloud while Sam held Cooper's leash. This town, the mayor began, owes a debt to a silent guardian who stood watch when we couldn't. A dog abandoned, broken, and scarred who risked his life to stop a madman and protect a child. Today we honor Cooper, not just as a hero, but as a symbol of healing, loyalty, and the quiet strength that lives in every wounded soul. There were tears, there were cheers, but the most powerful moment came when Sam, unprompted, knelt down, wrapped his arms around Cooper's neck, and whispered, "You're my best friend, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Jonah felt something shift inside him, then some old wall crumble. For so long he had carried guilt. Guilt for not recognizing Griggs for what he truly was. Guilt for turning a blind eye when the dog came limping through his station that first night. But that weight was gone now. Cooper had given everything to protect the boy, and Jonah had finally done the right thing by protecting him in return. Night, as the town slept and the stars burned quietly above the hills, Jonah stood alone by the back fence. The air was calm, the woods were peaceful, and then he felt a gentle nudge against his hip. Cooper stood beside him, looking out into the trees, not searching, just watching. "What do you see?" Jonah asked softly. But Cooper didn't answer, of course. He just sat calm and still, as if to say, "I see that it's finally over." And for once, Jonah believed him. They stayed like that until the sky lightened at the edges. A man who once ran from responsibility, a dog who was once discarded like trash, and a silence that finally didn't feel like something was about to break it. In a world that often forgets the quiet ones, the wounded ones, and the ones who bear their scars without complaint, this story ended not in noise, but in peace. A child was saved, a town was changed, and a dog named Cooper, whose head once lay trapped in a rusted gate, was finally, undeniably, free.